All right, so ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our first agenda for the day, which is the education agenda, putting education back on track. So when we think about youth, the first thing that comes to mind is education. And the pandemic has undoubtedly reformed the way we learn. Before COVID-19, most of us would have never imagined that we could attend most of our classes online.
Yeah, I believe that most of you here are university students or were university students. So how many of you here have taken any online classes?
Wow!
Wow, a lot of you. Did you enjoy it? No?
I believe that most of us here prefer
Wow, okay.
physical class.
Well, that brings us to our agenda today.
Jokes aside, the past 2 years have been seen as a major setback for the many students regardless of age. Some would even coin this young generation as the lost COVID generation. But how are we going to put education back on track?
Like you guys mentioned earlier that you don't like online classes. Let's hear it from our speakers for our first panel session of the day, Putting Education Back on Track. We are honored to have our speakers, Professor Tan Sri Dato Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector from International Islamic University, Malaysia.
And we have Professor Dr. Pradip Nair, Deputy Vice Chancellor and Chief Academic Officer from Taylor's University.
We have Mr. Raza Azmi Adam, Director from Google for Education.
And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, our moderator for the session, Ms. Ida Tien, Acting CEO for Yayasan Tunku Abdul Rahman. Please be seated, yeah? All right, so over to you, Ms. Ida.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, good morning everybody. It's really much bright and early today, so we're very excited to be one of the first sessions. So hopefully we can still capture your attention throughout. And I think today we have quite an esteemed panel. We were in the holding room just chatting as well, and I think without realizing it, we started the forum without you guys in the holding room. So definitely a very exciting conversation that we'll be having today. And I think when we talk about looking at with the title of today's session around putting education back on track, is to suggest that at some point education was perhaps off track. And I think when we talk about education being off track, I think a lot of the discussion is centering around what happened to education during the pandemic of the last 2 or 3 years. And I think there were a lot of unexpected challenges and perhaps also unexpected opportunities during the pandemic. And that has also allowed us both to innovate but also to understand some of the gaps that has happened during the pandemic that we hope to learn from and to improve on moving forward in higher education. A lot of conversations as well today beyond the pandemic will be focusing on what this means for, I suppose, students and young professionals like you in terms of how do we adapt to the workforce, but also thinking about what are the roles that we play and what's the role that education and institutions can play to support students and young professionals to think about how do you support communities. And lastly, also talking about some of the general higher education trends in Malaysia that we should probably all take note of when we talk about how do we educate our populace in the future. So I think to start today's session, I think I wanted to start with something quite simple, which is when we talk about the pandemic, we've also spoken about how it has changed the way we learn or we teach in higher education. And I think one of the things that perhaps was on people's mind was also how has higher education or education been redefined because of the pandemic. So I think maybe I want to start off with Tan Sri Zul actually to talk about how do you think the definition of education has changed as a result of the pandemic?
Hello. Okay. Assalamualaikum. Greeting of peace and a very good morning. Thanks for having me here. Saturday morning, yes, but it's a very important Saturday morning, I guess. There's a very important question when you talk about what has changed as far as education is concerned. From my point of view, I think the word education itself has changed. I am, for the last maybe decade or so, believe that education today is no longer education. It can be anything but education. And the reason is very simple, because the education is about addressing human problems. It has to be human-centric education. In other words, when we look at the pandemic, what do we see today was basically the question of human centricity. When we got into a lockdown, we lose our humanness. We do not know how to react. We do not know how to even to behave. And this whole idea of lockdown and being isolated, this now becomes a new problem for education. We talk about mental health. We have not been talking about mental health for a long time, when mental health is part and parcel of the very innate part of education that we have left it. You know? And why do I say this? Because I think I start with the premise of what we have got in Malaysia, where we call the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, the national education philosophy. How many of you have heard of the national education philosophy? Very few. You ask the same question in university, I think most of them have not heard, including the vice chancellors. Sorry to say this. Now you go into a system that you don't even understand what the philosophy is all about. I don't think Googles will take you if you don't understand what Google is all about. And yet you have droves of people who do not understand what the philosophy of education in Malaysia is all about. Running a university, educating you, is that education? So I think we have to understand what education is all about to start off with, right? Now, education at the end of the day, summarily, is about economics. It's about what I call the 3 M's. The training of manpower, the training of the mind, and the training how to use machine on for the purpose of the market, the 4 M's. You can summarize education into that. Yeah? And we are asked every time and again to make sure that our students are employable, which is nothing wrong. But what is it that you want to be employed for? You know, so when I talk to Raja Azmi, I don't think my student can fit into Google. Google is a different setup altogether. So what am I training them for? Basically, we come back to the question of the human being. And when we go to that education, the philosophy of education, it says quite clearly that education in Malaysia want to produce a balanced and harmonious human person. That's it. Yeah? And what is harmonious and balanced? It says you must balance between intellectual, spiritual, physical, and emotional. Now, when we come to the pandemic, you may be well educated, you may have got a PhD and whatever else, yeah? You may know a little bit of co-curriculum, yeah, whatever, but you have failed totally in terms of emotional resiliency, spiritual copingness. So when you are locked down for 2 months, what you can think about is just suicide, that's it. And this is where the mental health issue comes in. When we talk about the philosophy of education, we need to be trained in all these 4. If you are well trained in terms of spirituality and emotional intelligence, in a sense, you probably have gone through the lockdown without any problem at all. And that is the failure of education today. And now we are coming back to education and talking about onlines and stuff like that. I asked them, where is spirituality in this? Where is emotion in this? Can you do emotional education through online? Can you do spiritual education through online? Does it work? Yeah? So these are the bigger questions at the end of the day. What is education for? Unless you get that right, then whatever you're going to devise, until you change those premises, then whatever you're going to devise for the future, I'm afraid another pandemic comes in, we'll be caught with another sort of problem. And I think that's my biggest problem. What is education? We need to redefine education for the sake of humanity. It's no longer for the sake of Malaysia or just myself alone. You know, we're talking about humanity. When the pandemics come, it is about humanity, the survival of humanity. And yet, the stark naked truth is this. when we talk about vaccination, suddenly humanity becomes not an issue at all. Because the developed countries will take all the vaccinations that they've got. 85% of their population get vaccinated. 10% of the developing countries not even started vaccinating. And yet you talk about humanity. You know? And these are developed countries where education is supposed to be world class. We're supposed to copy them. And that's what education at the end of the day is about. Dollars and cents, it's about survival, it's about me, and it's about colonialization. It's not about educating people together to survive, to make sure that this world is a prosperous, balanced world, a sustainable world, the way we put it. There's another dimension that we're going to talk about, sustainability. So I'll stop there. I can be very emotional about this, but you get my point. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Tan Sri Zul. I think you brought up an interesting point that we'll definitely be exploring a bit further later around this idea of creating a whole being, right? That isn't just about being able to serve a self-interest of whether or not it is getting a job or earning a certain salary, but it's also about what's the role that we play to make society a more humane and better place for everyone, right? So I think Prof as well, Prof Pradeep, you believe in that too. You believe in this idea of lifelong learning, right? But I think one of the things as Tan Sri Zul has pointed out was it would have been quite challenging to impart that during the pandemic. I wonder how Taylor's or your team has been attempting to do that during the pandemic as well.
Good morning, everyone. Congratulations for being here so early on a Saturday. Yeah, it's really good to see so many young people interested in what we have to say. I think let me start by contextualizing what happened to us in the last 2 years. I think it would be terribly wrong to say the pandemic changed many things. I think the change and the challenge to higher education began a little before the pandemic, right? And most of you have heard about the move from the third to the fourth industrial revolution and then on to the fifth industrial revolution. We are on the threshold of that. I think the industrial revolution changed or forced companies to change and to adapt. And when those changes took place at the workplace, when the criteria for hiring changed, universities had to change, but not most universities kind of didn't quite change for various reasons. I think what the pandemic then did was it accelerated the pace of change. It forced thousands of universities around the world that were resistant to change to kind of be forced to wake up and say, oh, bloody hell, you know, my students are better than me in using technology, you know. So I think universities were rudely awakened to change, not just to change to the need for technology, but to change the way learning and teaching takes place. And so to your question, how did a university like ours, I think we personally, we embraced technology as early as 2012. We had our e-learning blueprint in 2012. In 2013, we became the first university in the country and in the perhaps one of the few in the region to record all our lectures. And so every day when lecturers teach in our lecture theatres, the lectures were recorded and they were pushed back to the students with the slides in slices within a minute after the lecture. And so when the pandemic hit us in 2020, we were sitting on over 40,000 recorded lectures. And so we were able to pivot a lot faster. Now, having said that, I think the challenge for us was to convince our students and their parents that online learning is not inferior and can be effective given the circumstances to face-to-face learning. That was our challenge. In the first, I think when the lockdown was announced in March, I think it took us about 3 to 4 months, and it was about engagement. So the emails don't work, the messages online don't work. We were holding online town halls. Each of our deans was actually meeting students online and not talking about announcements or what, but just to talk about how learning online is very different from learning face-to-face. And we had to do the same thing with our teachers. A teacher can very comfortably speak for an hour in front of the class with occasional breaks, but you could never do that online. I think the way you teach online is quite different from the way you teach face-to-face. So I think the adaptation that all of us had to make was a change in expectations, managing expectations, a change in trying to manage the learner behavior, the teaching approach, in order to kind of find that balance where students were comfortable learning online. And by August, the noise started to quieten down, perhaps because we were doing a good job, but perhaps also because students realized that this MCO is not going to end so soon. So they were like, okay lah, you can't beat them, you join them lah, you know, kind of a thing. So it was really out of no choice as well for many young people. But what was interesting is that by the middle of 2021, we had 2 groups of students. One that didn't want to come back. Ayah, must drive lah, must pay parking lah, you know, must spend on lunch lah and all that. And they kind of became very comfortable online, and they started convincing their friends, hey, make sure you don't go. If you don't go, then we all are okay, you know. And those who went, they were kind of looked upon not very positively. And that was around the early, you know, probably March to June 2021. But there was fatigue. There was learning fatigue. You see, human beings are tribal. We are essentially, a species that need that social interaction, that you know, you want to see, feel, touch. You want to hug somebody. You want to be able to high five someone and all that. So when come 2022, when we were allowed to have larger number of cohorts on campus, and now finally, you know, all of them can come back, we found from our own surveys that students appreciated the ability to be in a face-to-face environment, but that doesn't mean that we should drop all the advancements that we have made in higher education, the hybrid learning, and so on and so forth. I think universities need to adapt to a new learning expectation from students, a new learning behavior from learners. And so that's my long answer to your short question.
I want to sort of like touch on that point a bit around, I think both Najizul and Prof, you have spoken as well around how do you prepare students for the real world. I think you mentioned as well that perhaps your students may not be able to fit some of the criteria of Googliness, I think, at Google. So I want to point that question to you now, Raja, and ask actually from your perspective, I guess, perhaps as an employer first, when people talk about employability skills, what are those to you, and how do you see that play out in perhaps the young people that you have been able to recruit or meet in the last few years?
Assalamualaikum, selamat pagi. First and foremost, I think thanks Tan Sri and Prof to give that kind of insights. For Google, I think a lot of people want to work for Google. Some of the elements in Google, when we interview someone to join Google, one of the elements that is really that we really look at is this element called Googliness. Okay, so you need to have this element called Googliness. What is Googliness? Googliness is very much leadership. It's very much scenario driven. When we talk to someone and we know in terms of the 3 things that is very important to Google is the 3 R. It is not Raja, Raja, Raja. is respect for the opportunity given to you, respect to the user that we have, and respect each other. So that becomes very important in terms of the culture that Google has in whatever that we do. So by doing so, every employee in Google can also someone help you, even though it is not your job, but you're helping you because you reached out to someone, can you please help me? Typically what people say, what's in for me to help you? This is not my job. But in Google, just because we have this Googliness element, we are even given the opportunity to give that person a bonus. So we have this element called G thanks. Anything in Google is all about G, right? In Google, once you come in, everything is about Go links, all about Google links and whatever not. But we have this thing called G thanks. If I like someone who have done something for me, I can give them a G thanks, a G bonus, a peer bonus, and this is monetary, right? And the person, what people need is just a tap at the back saying that, thank you very much for helping me. And that really helps. Psychologically, that really helps you in terms of helping each other. And number two, when I say Googliness, we also create this environment called psychological safety environment. So anything happens in Google that you can just voice out and ask your bosses, why are you taking this decision? You can challenge status quo. So the founders of Google, Sergey and Larry, even now Sundar Pichai, when he talks to the people in his all hands, people in Google can just ask, I think we don't like this direction. I think you're taking a big mistake. And they take it very objectively. So in learning, I think this is also important. I think that will shape you to ask the status quo, rather than when the lecturers or your teacher saying, please jump, and you will say, how high? Right? So I think it's in Google is about challenging that, because once you do that, innovation happens. Right? Because you're challenging status quo, but sometimes some people challenge for the no reason. You need to have a reason. Why are you challenging that status quo? And that drives innovation. So I think this is a culture that we look at. That's why Tan Sri was saying nobody fits. I'm telling you, I'm from a local graduate too, from a local uni. So you do have the chance to get into Google as well. So, right? So, thank you.
Sure.
Can I come in? When we talk about the Industrial Revolution, I also think that there must be something that we understand what Industrial Revolution is. Well, suddenly this word Fourth Industrial Revolution dawned on us just a couple of years ago. And I think most of us would not know how to relate to the Fourth Industrial Revolution unless you begin to understand what the First Industrial Revolution is all about. The Industrial Revolution does not happen on its own. It's a whole continuum, it's a whole process, right? What happened in the 1700s when we talk about the First Industrial Revolution? Everybody knows about the steam engine and so on and so forth, which is good, all right? But what most of us fail to understand, with the First Industrial Revolution, there's already the first negative impact of industrialization. At that particular point, we talk about massive pollutions, yeah? But nobody talks about this. And then come the Industrial Revolution, the Second Industrial Revolution, with mass production, more pollution. The global warming climate change problem is a 300-year problem. It's not a problem of yesterday. We started 300 years ago, and we are still dealing with it because we have not thought through what this Industrial Revolution is all about. Until now, we have no solutions. And we're going to live with this. And this is the thing that about education. When you talk about education, usually you want to find where the balance is. If I want to produce this, what will be the impact on human person and the environment? That is not taken into account. And education then were made to be, quote unquote, a factory. Women got out to work, children's child labor was there, yeah? Capitalism was invented, Marxism came into board. All this changed the structure of education. And education now to me is just a factory. Yeah? And we need to move on. We cannot live with this factory environment as far as education is concerned. My KPI as far as the government is concerned is how many of my students are employable. If 80% I'm okay, if not 80% they will hound me. and I need to change the statistics somehow. You know, and it's not difficult. If he may be an engineer, but if he drives a Grab, then he's employed. I tick the box. And if you've gone to that extent to understand what education is all about, the next phase of education is what Raja Azmi was talking about. What is he talking about? Basically, to me, is a question of values. You cannot operate Google the way it operates if you don't have trust, if you don't have respect, you don't have integrity, you don't have all the things that we talked about in terms of values for the human person. Where on earth in our university that we teach about these values? Where on earth in our school that we teach about this? We are still talking about bullying. You know, these what, 19th century problems? So we don't have these elements that makes the new education system. You can forget about it. You're still talking about the economics of education, which is, the pandemic says it doesn't work. Yeah? You can be the richest man in the world, but you do not know how to spend your money because you are locked down. There's nothing to buy. You can't even eat that money. If that money can be eaten, that's fine. Yeah? So these are the premises I think that we need to ask and question now. Your generation must tell us what we have done wrong and what you want for the future. It's your future, it's not my future. I'll be dead in 5 years' time. But you need to define what your future looks like. Is this factory model something that you are satisfied with? If you are not, then what is the change? Where do you go from here? We need to rethink what is the next revolution. It could not be an industrial revolution. It could be a human revolution. I don't know. But I think that's an open question, which I hope we can settle today, inshallah. Thank you.
I mean, I agree with Tan Sri, but how many of you have heard of Daniel Goleman? You have? Excellent. Back in the early 90s, Goleman did a very extensive longitudinal research to look at what makes a successful person. Okay? And so I'll just kind of summarize the research. He found that when you finish university, 23, 24 years old, academic, this is in the 90s, not today, not in the Google era, right? It's different today, but even then in the 90s, the research showed that at the start of a person's career, where most of you are today, at the start of a person's career, their academic grades, having a first-class honors, the university that they come from, counts quite a bit. It counts quite a bit. The employers tend to be more biased if your results, your academic grades are better, if you come from a better university, and so on and so forth. This is in the early 90s. So you can imagine that has been the way in which employers hired way back then. But Goleman's research was so significant because he says by the time this graduate comes to about 30, 32 years old, he's overtaken by the fellow who'd never really studied very well, but had a lot of friends. He knew how to negotiate. He had a higher degree of life skills and emotional intelligence. And that's precisely Tan Sri's point, that in a country like Malaysia and in many countries in Asia where academic grades are emphasized a great deal and perpetuated by a tuition teacher to complement the class teacher, and everybody races for grades, you find that when you go to the university, you will continue what was the measure, what measured you as successful. So back in Standard 1, Standard 2, all the way up to Form 5, it was all about the A's and all that. So when you get to the university, it's about making sure that your CGPA, you keep a very high CGPA, you get your A's. But ladies and gentlemen, the Googles of the world stopped looking for A's some time ago already, right? They stopped. Ernst & Young, we've got a wonderful lady from EY. EY was one of the first of the big four to scrap the need for first-class honors as a recruitment criteria. And then Deloitte. And you look at all the big companies in the world, they're basically saying your grades are important. It gets you at least shortlisted for an interview. You have a degree. But beyond that, it's about life skills and emotional well-being. It's about your communication skills, your networking, your collaboration. You know, it's those things that count a lot. So if we are to reset education, one of the first things we need to do, and I know not many people will like this, is to get rid of exams and grades. Because of the fact that there are many ways to measure competency, not necessarily through a terminal examination, right? And the question is, what do you measure in an exam? Very often in universities, the measure is discipline-specific knowledge and skills, right? So you could be a great communicator, but if you don't know your stuff, you're marked as poor, right? What if our education system, right, and especially the assessment, what gets measured gets done. And as long as we continue to measure the knowledge and the skill to perform a specific job, and we don't measure problem solving, creative thinking, critical thinking, communication skills, right? And that's why in my university, what we did was we introduced a dual transcript system where every student will still get their academic transcript when they graduate, but they also receive a transcript with a score for their communication skills, their problem-solving skills, creative thinking skills, etc., etc. Right? Now, people may say, oh, that's interesting, so will employers be looking at this skill? I really don't care what employers look for. I think what gets measured gets done. And if students know that their degree results depend not just on study and mug the knowledge and the skill, but it also depends on how well they speak, how well they communicate with each other, the social competencies, the values that Tan Sri spoke about. If our young people, and I wish that this is done not just at the university, that it's done way back to kindergarten, when assessments which drive our behavior are revolutionized to measure human values, human behavior. And I believe that if we did that, then we'll be producing a generation of young people that are more rounded, that are more holistic. Thank you very much.
Powerful stuff. I think a lot of what you've mentioned as well, I think it jogged my memory as well when I was, 16 in school, and I had one teacher who told all of the good students in class, and they were like, all of you do not try and laugh or look down on the people in the quote-unquote last class, because you'll be working for them in the future. And I think that speaks actually a lot to the importance of life skill. I think sometimes we call it soft skills as well, and I think that really kind of underestimate or undervalue what these skills are really about, right? Because soft makes you think of something that is not that important, it's secondary perhaps to technical skills, right? And I think in Malaysia as well, there's a lot of emphasis on, okay, how do we get students in more employable sectors, in STEM sectors, but there's that humanity, the human part of it they may be lacking. So I think I wanted to ask actually from Raja's perspective as well, as an employer too of students, right, and young professionals, do you see those skills right now in the workforce, and what do you think is missing in the Malaysian market?
Yeah, so I think before I answer that, let me give you a perspective in terms of the experience that I had. I think there's a talk I met Jack Ma, and Jack Ma was saying in terms of in whatever that he was hiring in Alibaba, he was hiring for the best intelligent engineers to join him. Everybody was undoing each other. I'm better than you because my grades are better. But bottom line, the machine is a lot more intelligent than you. All right? So in Google, we have elements whereby DeepMind AI tools that is so good that can predict things in terms of not a human can do. So what is the differentiator that Jack Ma was saying when he was hiring? The differentiator is you. Because if you look at Grab, why is not successful in Japan? Because the taxi drivers in Japan dress well, wear gloves. When you want to get into the car, they open the door, they lead you into the car. That is the differentiator rather than a Grab. So for me, if I interview someone, your smile is your logo, your personality is your business card, right? The way you make others feel is your trademark. That's how I look at things, right? So it's not about the grades, because all of y'all have grades, but all of y'all have strength. It is not about how intelligent you are, because we have tools that's better than what you think you are. It's the ability to think. So for us as an employer, to come back to the question that you asked, these are the elements that we look at in terms of how, and current, I would say, the environment that we are in, I think the students that we have in higher education is very much driven by grades. I think Tan Sri brought up the element of factory. Why factory was built by the British those days is to have all these bells and whistles. This is exactly how a school looks like, bells and whistles. It's like a factory, so that they can transfer someone from one factory to the other factory. Because in schools, there's A, B, C class, D class. But for me, education should not be like that. It has to be that everybody is individual, everybody has a different pattern of learning. In Google, it's the same. You can learn anywhere, anytime, and you can impart these kind of things. So when we speak to the students, when we are hiring some of the students and whatever not, these are the elements that sometimes is missing. Elements that they're all good in terms of technical conversation, but comes to humanity, comes to the element of what I said, the 3 R's and so on and so forth. You can't see it, because the interviews that in Google, for technical is very much in terms of we give you a problem, you solve the problem. But there's the other element whereby there's very subjective. We ask you scenarios. We just want to see you how you answer the scenarios. And that scenario is based on your, I would say, experience. And a lot of people fake this experience, right? And we know a couple of questions. I know you're faking the experience already, right? So I know that you're not talking. It's okay to tell the truth in terms of what you went through. And that's what we hire. I think you watched this movie called Internship. And that's the environment that Google has in terms of they do hire anybody from any background. I have colleagues who are musicians, not even an engineer. All right, I have colleagues who have done things that you'll be think of hard teachers that was done certain things, and we hire them for some of the abilities that they have in terms of bringing that kind of experience into the ecosystem and within Google. I think these are the things that you need to look at. It's not only academic. Yeah, sorry to say this is what it is. It's more like a bragging tool for the parents. My son got 7 A's, 8 A's, 9 A's, 10 A's, 20 A's, whatever not. So but that's not the element. The element here is about your personality, which is very, very key, and what is the differentiator you're bringing to the table. And that will make you totally different compared to the rest. All right, thank you.
Thank you. I think before I move on to another question, I just want to let the crowd know and the audience know as well that you can actually submit questions to us. We'll be getting to the questions from the audience later on. I'm sure there's some very exciting and juicy questions towards the last 10 to 15 minutes. And with that, sorry, I actually have another question, and this is addressed to all of you, right? We talk a lot about soft skills, life skills, and wanting students to have leadership, right? And this is something with the competitive advantage that we have against the rise of AI, right? So there is now a growing sentiment that therefore perhaps higher education isn't that relevant anymore, that people are now maybe opting to work and say that these are the skills that either would allow me to have an advantage from the beginning because of wages, or just because I feel that it's better to learn these skills and apply it in real life versus going to a university for 3 to 4 years. I wanted to ask each and every one of you actually if you agree with this sentiment, and if not, what is the relevance of higher education in all of this? Whoever can start first. Yeah.
I think it's premature to conclude that higher education is not relevant. What we can conclude is that the manner in which education, not just higher education, is delivered today needs a serious rethink. Right? Is employability the only indicator of the success of a university, right? And you read, I mean, you watch social media, you read the papers, you have universities that talk about 100% employment, you know. Tan Sri said if he doesn't get anything above 80%, he may be booted out, right? So is employability the only indicator? And then we segue into then what should be the other indicators. I think education needs to return to the root of where it started. Look, guys, we're not reinventing the wheel. If you go back 1,000 years, even 2,000 years, if you go back to the first schools that started in the madrasas or the churches or the ashrams, they were about the development of a good human being with good values, with good knowledge, good skills, and people doing things for the betterment of society and community. So I think what needs to be done is to tweak the way in which higher education is measured, is to tweak then how it's delivered, and to be more relevant to the expectations of the learner. You know, the learners today are not the same as the learners tomorrow. Most of you are probably Gen Z, right? Soon there's Gen Alpha, right? The way they learn, and the pandemic and the MCO period, as much as you may have liked or disliked online learning, it actually changed a lot of your behavior towards information and knowledge acquisition, right? And I think there's a need to adapt to the changing behavior of learners. But I just want to perhaps mention one point, which I think is very important, that this generation and the coming generation of learners are probably not going to be very motivated by just going to a university to get a degree or to get the skill. Because they know, in fact you know more than us, that you can get that knowledge and that skill in a multitude of other ways, right? What you need is credentialing, which is what universities do, because, you know, someone somewhere decided that universities are the only ones authorized to give a degree or a diploma or a certificate. What if that changes tomorrow? Already, Google says, I can give you my certificate. Microsoft says, I can give you mine too. And so there are so many competing alternatives to this institution called universities or college. The question is, will these competing alternatives become more attractive to you than what universities need to do? The research shows us, these are reports we read, 2020, 2021, EY has done a report, the World Economic Forum has done a report. Oh, thank God, we're still relevant. That's what these reports say, that students now and in the coming at least decade or two will still want to go to universities because that's a place where they get the credentials that many organizations still recognize. But I think we're on borrowed time. That if we don't change, as fast as our learners are changing, many universities will be deselected, many universities may become irrelevant. So, is a university relevant? Is higher education relevant? Absolutely yes. But the question is, the universities have to shift. They have to shift to align to the expectations of the learners. The learners have different expectations. Look at this. You know, I when I walked in, I said, do you think I could bring a plastic bottle? And they said, yeah, I think it should be okay. And I said, you know, these guys are going to judge me, you know, if they see me. And that's the learner today. The learner wants us to practice what the hell we teach. I'll stop here because perhaps my colleagues may have something to add.
Can I jump in? I mean, just like the prof, I came here, I thought I would like to dress like a youth. No tie, no coats, not socks also. You know? So, but I thought I kind of, overestimate myself. But the point I think is well taken. Higher education, what does higher education mean? For my point is basically for higher purposes. That's what higher education stands for. At the end of the day, we talk about almost a university is like a finishing school. Could you produce a complete human person at the end of the day? You know, if you read, the UNESCO has got 4 pillars of learning. Learning to do, learning to know. This is what we have done very well. The 2 other pillars, learning to be and learning to live together. We have done hopelessly on this. Learning to be is about you knowing yourself. Until you know yourself, you will not be able to live together. And this is our problem in Malaysia. We keep on segmenting ourselves, that we do not know ourselves and we do not know each other. And Malaysia is not like the Malaysia that I used to be when I was in school. We have forgotten about these 2 other pillars, which is part of the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. And so the higher purpose is about building a better society. And education is a leveler of society. You don't sell education. Now you commoditize education. If I have money, I'll buy good education. If I don't have money, then I'll get the lousiest. It doesn't become a leveler of society anymore. And in fact, education has become one of the disparities between the have and have-nots. And these are the reality of it. So when we talk about higher education, at the end of the day, what is the higher purpose of education? We give them all these other traits. At the end of the day, can you finish up with a better human being? Then you can be a better engineer. Then you can be a better economist. Then you can better anything. But you cannot be a better economist if you're a lousy human being. And this is what the country is suffering now. People in higher places, they are corrupted, and they are still behaving as though they are the best person in the world. You know, pushing for elections and hoping to get elected, and doing whatever they need to do. We need to talk about this. Education is a leveler of society that puts everything at equal level. That you and I is entitled to this because we are the human person that the university should supposed to train us that way. At the end of the day, it makes no difference between me and him because we are now at the same pace, at the same path. And that's what higher education is for. And we have lost this. Higher education now is about just the market. You know, I'm not against economy, but economy is one of many. And this then we go into another realm, which we call education for sustainable development. An attempt to diffuse economy into 3 other things. What about ecology and what about the human person? And how many of our university does education for sustainable development? It was announced in 2015 in New York, all right? All the head of nations, including Malaysia, sign on to this, but nobody picks it up. Ironically, when the World Economic Forum on the same period, 2016, talks about the 4IR, everybody jumps on the bandwagon. You know? Why? Because we have lost the purpose of education. Education about sustainable development, putting things again in equal terms, is not attractive anymore because all of us are talking about the same thing. To be prosperous is to be economically well, which Bhutan has said no. Bhutan said, I want to talk about gross national happiness. They don't talk about GDP. And their statements in their constitution say the government must deliver happiness, otherwise the government should not be in place. If that's the judgment we use, we have lost our governments maybe 3 decades ago. We are all miserable now. You know? So we need to redefine this and get into the real crux of the issue before we can talk about education per se. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, Raja, maybe a quick one on this.
Yeah. For us, I think in Google, I think we invested a lot in terms of applied digital skills, what the trends that we are looking at in terms of the market, being a search company, we know a lot of trends in terms of happening, and we build curriculums that is really relevant for the industry. So we are very supportive of short courses, microcredits. When we look at people or students in terms of coming for interview, what are the things that they have done in terms of projects that's very, very relevant to what the industry looks at. I think this is very important. This is why we advise the institution and also the higher education ministry in terms of this is what's relevant, and this is based on all the data that we have, because Google is a search company, all right? And with all that, we advise that these are the things is required. Because I give you my personal example. When I graduated, I was learning Motorola microprocessor. But what was the trend was Intel microprocessors. I was really not relevant when I got out to look for a job, because I can't even articulate in terms of what Intel was doing compared to what I was learning, right? So I think things need to change from that perspective, because sometimes the lecturers are very comfortable to do things that a curriculum that surrounds what he knows, right? I think that need to be changed, because I think there's a trend is required. The trend tells you in terms of what we are hiring for. And if someone can come with that kind of things in terms of whatever they have learned on a personal basis, you can learn from anywhere. Google has a lot of tools online for free. Grow with Google, Applied Digital Skills. We have career certification in terms of what the trends are looking at. You do all of that. We also take some of these names of people who have done all of that and put into a pool, and we try to promote these kind of students for driving employability. I think that's very, very important. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Now, I think it's quite interesting how many like interesting questions just came in just the last 5 minutes. So I'm actually trying. I'll try my best to go through some of the most interesting and most popular questions. So hopefully I have a bit more time from the organizer to go through it. So the first question, I think anybody, please feel free to respond to this. And it is one of the top voted questions, is this. If we were to tilt our education focus towards humanics, meaning being more AI or robot proofed, where should the change start? Should it be our culture, or should it be our economic structure? Where should we start from there? If we were to focus more on trying to make our people more resilient, I'm going to rephrase this, a bit more resilient towards AI, proofing against robots, where should the change begin?
So here's the fact. I think it was the World Economic Forum that predicted, I don't know how many million jobs will be lost. You all have read this, right? You know, in the next 5 years or 10 years, 80 million jobs or whatever will be lost. Oh my God, you know, Chinese will say, "Say law." You know, what are we going to do, man? Oh my God, you know, this is a doomsday. You know, human beings are naturally more responsive to bad news than they are to good. Throughout the history of all the revolutions, whenever jobs are lost, more jobs have been created. So guys, don't worry, right? The data shows us that you may have lost 80 million jobs in the next 5 years or whatever, but there could be over 97 million new jobs. New jobs that require a different set of core skills. Now, I think the other data point I have is that from before the pandemic to about 2025, they predict that up to 40% of the core skills for a particular job will change. That means if you're a doctor and you have all these skills, right? There's now a 40% shift in the skills you need to have to remain relevant. So I guess a direct answer to build resilience, don't be worried about AI, the machine learning and all that. Yes, it will make some jobs redundant, but it's about reskilling. And in the context of education and higher education, it's about making sure that when we teach, we do not try to do it in the way it has been done before. So let me ask you this question, right? Why is education close-looped? So when you talk about education, you say you start kindergarten 2 years. Then you start primary school 6 years. For those 6 years, you can't do anything. You better go to school. You don't go to school, you're called a truant. And then secondary school is 5 years. After that, what to do? Must go university. Must do A-levels or foundation or STPM. And then degree 3 years. If you do 2 years, not good degree. You know? Stanford University, way back in 2016, introduced the concept of an open-looped education. They said, so what if you go and work 6 months in Google and then come to the university? And then, you know what? 6 months later, you go and work for Microsoft. Because, in other words, it's you don't choose a major, you choose a mission. Your mission. And if your mission is about wanting to be a great data scientist, then go work for Google for maybe, even intern with them, even after Form 5. But here in Malaysia, anak aku dia tak nak pergi universiti. Dia kata dia nak kerja dulu. What's wrong with that? Right? So if we rewrite the truths about education as we know it, right? I think we can still be relevant, and I think we can still produce resilient graduates. Because I think you should go and do what you think you need to do to become a better person and a more employable person and a happier person. And if that means we can allow our students to move in and out, the open loop model is you go in, you come out, you go in, you come out, you go in, you come out, right? If we can do that, I think we make our education system more dynamic. We allow our students to, because you said something about what you learn by the time you graduate, it wasn't relevant, right? Guys, you can never, no university in this world, no education institution in this world can ever keep in touch and be ahead of the industry. It's not our job. Our job is not to compete with you and become better than you. No. Our job is to educate. And to educate is not just the knowledge and the skills, but to educate you, to teach you to learn, the lifelong learning skills, right? So I think we need to be very clear what our role is. And if we're clear, then I think we'll be able to produce that. So I think, talking about resilience, I think we need to rewrite some of the rules around higher education.
Right. Thanks so much for that, Prof. Now I want to move on to probably the spiciest, I think, conversation that happened as well in the last few months. And I think this question is in reference to a study that was done in 2019 about SPM students whether or not they want to go to higher education. And this question goes, so 70% of SPM graduates do not want to continue higher education. How do we approach this segment and upskill those who would rather work than study?
For me, I think very simple. I think we need to look at pockets of why they don't want to study, because probably university is too long for them to study. So we need to look at, if it's really into TVET, for instance, you're a vocational person, you're an engineering person, why can't we do short courses, just focus on what is your skills? I think this is something that we need to profile individuals in terms of what they really want to do. Then those who really want to do short courses in terms of, these are the areas that I want to work on, and these are going to be the skills I want to look at. They want to be fast, they want to get to the job market, and they want to get skills. And industries like Google like this kind of stuff, because you straight away add value to whatever we are trying to do, right? We were talking about the AI elements. Don't worry about that, because AI or machine learning learn from the human. They're as dumb as they are. They learn a lot of things from the human, and they start building capacity until those who are mundane job, the robots can do it. And that's where reskilling, upskilling is very important. So for the students who doesn't want to do higher education, because they think that this is going to take such a long time, and education is no longer cheap. Parents can't afford it, and you come out from your college, you're going to have debt, PTPTN, right? Forever you're going to start paying for your debts and so forth. And we have not grown, sorry to say this, Malaysia have not really gone in terms of paying salary in terms of where we are compared to the other countries, even Indonesia or Singapore, I'm really comparing in terms of the fresh graduates in Singapore or in Indonesia, they earn more than what we get in the country. So I think there's also another abuse from that perspective. So people want to just get to job market, and I think this is where I think we should start looking at this, all these short courses and looking at the areas of interest and go for that. Thank you.
I think we need to look at a bigger picture. SPM you're talking about, yeah? It rings a bell that basically we talk about Greta Thunberg, 15 years old girl, doesn't want to go to school since 2018. She started a strike in front of the parliament and said, I don't want to go to school because the school is no longer relevant to me. And this is what she wants. She wants to say, can my future be as certain when I go to this school? It's not about employment, it's about how she lives her life in the future. And therefore she created Friday for the Futures, and they've got now millions of followers. So this 11% of SPM, I think, is a small section. But the issue is basically, what is education for? I think that is a question that you need to bring back. What is education for? And from my point of view, education now is about life. It's no longer about livelihood. All the while education is, I go to university because I can get better pay. But that's not a guarantee anymore, and therefore the attraction to education is no good. And that's why in my university, we repurposed it. And we say humanizing education. That you come in, you go out as a better human person. And that is the purpose of education. Being a better human person, you can organize your life better. And organizing life is about the world today, you know. And when I talk about the 3 M's or the 4 M's, we have got a substitute now. We say instead of just talking about manpower, we need to talk about humanity. How do we survive together as a species? The 6th mass extinction has happened. It will happen again. Are we going to survive in this planet with this global warming, climate change? What is a skill that we have got to stop this? Can we stop driving a car and pull the car? Can we stop doing something that we have already poisoning the planet? Do we need to poison it more? Can we change our lifestyle? Back to the question of life. If we do not know how to organize it, we are all doomed. There's already a book by 2 very important authors called The Collapse of the Western Civilization. And he says if you continue to do this, the world will collapse, and they put a date 2093. How old will you be? Before the end of the century, the world will collapse because we are not able to sustain it anymore. This is the question that we need to ask now. It's about our own survival. How do you organize life? Not about livelihood. You can be a millionaire of the world. When the world collapses, they will collapse with you. It's not as though they are trying to, you know, to go to Mars and stuff like that. Good luck to them. But they will not have time for this. And that's the urgent question that Greta Thunberg is asking from my generation, and your generation should be demanding the same thing. Where do you move from here? How do you repurpose education for the better of human beings? So we talk about humanity. When we talk about the mind, we also need to talk about the heart. You talk about emotional intelligence. Yeah? Where do you train this heart? This is where your emotion starts. How do you discipline this? Yeah? When we talk about machine high tech, we talk about high touch. How do you humanize this machine? So that it serves us, not we serving them, like your handphones. I don't know whether studies have been, you're looking at handphones 200 times a day for whatever purpose. And the gaps between 2 is about 15 minutes. You're addicted to that small device in your pocket that you carry all the time. They are mastering you now. You're the slave of that machine. How do you humanize this machine? And these are issues that I think we need to bring up if you want to talk about the future, because our survival depends on this until we understand it. And that's what education is for. Thank you.
Ida, I want to, this is an economic forum, right? Yeah. So I think there's a serious, we should take the statistic, I mean the study on the 72% of students who were polled said they're not so interested in pursuing their studies. I think we should take that and ask ourselves, what do we need to do about it? to conclude that university education is unnecessary is perilous. It is very, very dangerous. Most developed countries have at least 70% and above of its population with tertiary qualifications. And in most parts of the world today, at least for the next couple of decades, a tertiary qualification allows you to enter the workforce and earn decently, right? If we just take this lying down and say, people don't want to study, what to do, you know? Let's go get them to do short courses here, short courses there, you know, and so on and so forth. You're looking, Malaysia, by the way, is at 40% or around. Our access to higher education is only 40% of the addressable cohort. In a developed country, it's 70%, right? If we don't do something about this and we allow, I was told, this is Official Secrets Act. I sit on a couple of committees and I'm not supposed to reveal names, but I understand that enrollment into some of our public institutions in this year alone has been short of the actual capacity. So it's real. I think it's real. This thing about people not wanting to go and study, right? But what that does, don't forget, while all this is happening, we're becoming an aging nation. I think EPF says that only 10% of the population or thereabout have enough savings to survive beyond retirement. When you don't have an educated population, you basically have an underpaid workforce. And an underpaid workforce takes a much longer time to achieve that kind of salary levels to sustain you as you retire. So there is an economic fallout if we don't address why youths today seem to think that they don't need to go to a university or a college to study. So I think we need to study this. We need to perhaps get the universities and the colleges to do some serious soul searching of what is it that they need to do to attract these young folks. Not just go to Google, but come to me. Thank you very much.
I think we'll definitely direct any questions about this to you, Prof, in the future. The next one, Malaysia. I think this is something that we also talk about a lot in newspapers and Twitter especially. Malaysia has the second highest rate of women migrating out above the global average at 48%. In fact, I actually didn't know that. So what is your opinion about Malaysian brain drain? Malaysian brain drain.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very sad. I live through this every day because majority of the students who come out of our university actually actively look to get jobs overseas because they pay better. So I think to Raja Azmi's point, there is a challenge in trying to get a decent pay packet. The cost of living continues to rise, but the salaries don't rise proportionately. And as a result, I think we could possibly see the brain drain continue in the coming decade. At the same time, those people who are educated, because of the lack of jobs that are available to them, or perhaps because they have certain preferences about the jobs, we're beginning to see the advent of underemployment in our country. People who are overqualified for the jobs that they currently do, and hence they earn a much lower salary. So if you ask me, I think it's sad. I think it needs to be addressed.
The gig economy as well. A lot of them are starting to be part of the gig economy.
Yes. I mean, I think the gig economy is a generational thing, and it's here to stay, right? It just aligns with their own personal preference.
So I wonder, Roger, you have any points to add?
For me, I think the brain drain, this is real, right? For Google, we can work from anywhere. So I'm doing a JPAC role, Japan and Asia Pacific role. I could have been easily based in Australia or Singapore, but I chose to be in Malaysia. The only reason I chose to be in Malaysia, the sentiment that I have for the family here. My parents are still here. That's the only reason. Other than that, I think your pay package will be a lot more better in Singapore or in Australia. You get a better, I would say, balanced life, and so on and so forth. So this is real. I think this is where the country really need to look at in terms of how do you retain talent. There's a lot of talent in the country, and how do we create an environment so that we retain talent in terms of someone really need to seriously look into this, because if not, you can just see that people just leaving for better, I would say, a future for them, because especially for those young graduates, you have nothing to hold you. You don't have excess baggage. You can just straight away pack your bags and I just want to go and study somewhere and to be somewhere and so on and so forth, because that kind of exposure that you're going to get and whatever not. And this is something that we all need to come together. It's not your issues or whatever issues. The industry working with the government, working with the institution in terms of how do we retain talent in the country, because we do have a lot of talent. I'll be surprised, sometimes I go to Google Singapore office, 30% of them are all Malaysian. And they have moved to Singapore such a long time. So sometimes we wonder, these other talents are working elsewhere. We're supposed to come back to the country and so on and so forth.
Can I take this from a different point of view? I think we need to decouple the whole idea of education and jobs. If it's true that education is about mission orientation, then I think we need to forget about jobs for a while. You know, when you talk about talents, then your talent should be able to create jobs. Why do you need to knock on somebody else's door and ask for a job? If you're really talented, you can create jobs. And the Googles of the world today are people who create their own jobs. They don't ask jobs from somebody else. So I think we need to understand what is the mission of education. If it's a mission orientation, what is your mission? If my mission is to clear poverty from the country, there's a lot to be done. I joined the university because of the mission of the university. It's not because I want to get a great job. I was offered a job, but my mission says, no, I want to make sure that everybody who is poor will be out of poverty. That's a mission that I've got. And I don't care what pay do I get. That mission is important. So that mission, I think, is the one that brings us to people to go to Singapore, fine, because they want a better, you know, perks or whatever. But what is our mission in this country? There are many things that we need to do. Can we stay together and make this happen? I have a lot of other, you know, examples that I can think of that people are actually mission-oriented and they work on this. So if we decouple this, then you will go into different solution, different possibility, rather than just asking for jobs. If true, jobs is getting more difficult to get now with the competition. During my time when I graduate, jobs comes to me, and you can choose them. But I don't think this will be the way for the future. Then we need to reorientate ourselves and find out what is the mission of the university, what is the mission of education. You go to Taylor's, what is Taylor's all about? You go to my university, what is my university all about? We have got a mission to talk about a betterment of human life and civilization. That's the mission of my university. It's not about giving jobs. And how do you make that happen is a question that we need to sort it out together.
Thank you so much to the esteemed panel. This actually brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you everyone as well for your kind attention. I'm sure you may have plenty of questions that didn't get to follow through, so perhaps the organizing committee can consider getting this panel back in the future again. So with that, thank you so much, and I think I'll pass it over to the MCs.
Thank you so much, our dear panelists and our moderator, for such a wonderful session. Please remain on stage. We would like to invite the Vice President of Perdana Fellows Alumni Association, Ms. Amira Dayana, to present tokens of appreciation for our speakers and moderator.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank Professor Dr. Pradeep Nair, Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Mr. Raja Azmi Adam, for sharing their perspectives. And also, ladies and gentlemen, for Ms. Ida Pian for moderating the session. It's been a very, very interesting forum, I would say.
Let's get closer for a group photo, perhaps.
Right, let's have a group photo.
I find the session very, very meaningful. It really got me to think of a bigger picture beyond our examination slips, beyond our results, beyond our final grades, and to think about the philosophy and all the meanings behind education.
Alright, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our first agenda this morning. Please give another round of applause to our speakers and moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much.